Live from Washington, I'm Aisha Tanzim and you're watching Access Point.
If the Afghan government don't clear up their act, there are going to be serious consequences for the commitment of NATO and NATO members to the post-2014 operations in Afghanistan. We certainly want to remain committed to bringing more stability and prosperity to Afghanistan, but it takes two to tango, and it's about time the Afghan government signed the agreement.
This was Dutch Foreign Minister Frans Timmermans. He was echoing what we've been hearing from the US and NATO leadership for the last 2 weeks, ever since Afghanistan's President Hamid Karzai refused to sign the bilateral security agreement that determines if the US and NATO will leave behind any troops in Afghanistan. To talk about this and the future of Afghanistan, we have in our studios two guests. Jason Campbell of the RAND Corporation has worked on Afghanistan extensively, and Dr. Marvin Weinbaum of the Middle East Institute is an expert on Pakistan and Afghanistan. Welcome to Access Point. Dr. Weinbaum, want to start with you. Why is President Karzai at this point refusing so staunchly to sign this agreement?
I wish I knew. We're all, obviously we're taken aback by his, what turned out to be a last-minute refusal to sign. We thought we had negotiated an agreement. It took took a year, and then toward the end there was some real hard bargaining. And in the bargaining, he gave way on most of the points, interestingly. But then when he got to the Jirga, which he said was going to be, the voice of the people, and that he would abide by the voice of the people, when the Jirga said sign, he said no.
Not till April.
Not until April, and only on the condition that certain changes be made. And that's right.
Mr. Campbell, you were just in Afghanistan for 4 months. I'm just curious, why did President Karzai call the Jirga when he wasn't going to listen to it? Did he not know ahead of time that the Jirga was going to favor the agreement?
Well, like Dr. Weinbaum, I'm a bit mystified myself. For so long leading up to this agreement, or during the negotiation period, President Karzai held fastly to this notion that he was going to require a loya jirga to ultimately get the voice of the people involved in the process, and that once he would, or the insinuation was once that was provided, then it would be more of a formality for him signing off. So right now, it's very difficult to understand where he's coming from. I think we know right now that he is certainly very concerned with his legacy. As we look towards elections in the spring, he's going to be concluding what's been over 12 years as either acting or serving president. And he's stated publicly himself that if he signs this agreement and the post-2014 environment isn't demonstrably more secure, then history will ultimately judge him for not providing the the security that was needed.
Dr. Weinbaum, talking of legacy, the new conditions that President Karzai has all of a sudden come up with, as you say, after hard bargaining for a year, is it because he's looking at his legacy or trying to gain points with the Afghan people, or is he looking for a position in the new government?
Well, I don't know that he's looking for a position in the new government, but he certainly wants to be relevant. And as people try to understand what he's done, the one area where there seems to be agreement is that he doesn't want to be irrelevant between now and, say, April. He wants to continue to be a player, and that if he were to sign the agreement, somehow he would be a lame duck.
President, yes.
He wants very much to, we believe, at least some of us do, to be influential, particularly with the choice of a new president. He has it in his mind that somehow by holding off that he could be in a better position to do that. Others would argue he's controlling the machinery of the election, so he can do that anyway. So it's really hard to fathom, but I think the short answer is that it probably is his conception of political advantage going forward.
For the benefit of our viewers, Mr. Campbell, please describe to me what new conditions has President Karzai put on signing the agreement?
Sure. The two latest ones that have been reported are one, releasing the remaining detainees that are Afghan citizens from Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And the other one is to have the U.S. Essentially put together and facilitate a robust peace negotiations effort, which is somewhat ironic given that he's been spurring thus far U.S. efforts to try to bring the Taliban to the table for going on 2 years now. And as far as the Guantanamo Bay issue goes, the detainees, he knows full well that that is not just in the president's power to do that. Congress would have to, most likely after a very staunch debate, have to sign off on that.
But there's also something about raids. The Afghans have to stop the raids and stop killing, in his words, innocent Afghan citizens. He's also accused U.S. of killing Afghan citizens recently.
Right, but I don't know that that's not necessarily a new issue. That was a big part of the negotiation process, and supposedly that was something that they had come to agreement on in the BSA. So that was considered to be a sort of an issue that had been ironed out. But he keeps coming back to that, even though the wording in the agreement as it currently stands is very strong. And President Obama has reinforced that by saying that the U.S. would only engage in such missions if, in the most dire circumstances, if a U.S. citizen's life were at risk or some other very remote possibility. So that is something he keeps coming back to, but has been discussed ad nauseum over the last year.
Dr. Weinbaum, President Karzai has known to have told his associates, some close associates, don't worry, the U.S. is never going to leave. Just put up your demands, whatever they are. In the end, they'll surrender. Is he right?
Yeah, well, that kind of thinking is certainly there. And it's been there all along, and with good reason in a way, because what he has found, what he believes, first of all, is that however much Afghanistan needs the U.S. also needs Afghanistan. And therefore, he's frequently said and done things which were terribly irritating to American policymakers. And yet, we sort of gave him a pass. We said, well, he's just what he is, and we'll work past this. And so he does have it seems, in his head that he can get away with a great deal because we won't pay the price of really leaving. And his thinking is that we've already made such an investment that we need a stable Afghanistan to justify the years that we have spent there. And then maybe more fantastic notion here that we want this as a base for regional influence in Southwest Asia may also be part of his thinking. But in any case, he's got these conceptions which I think are driving him.
Okay, and what's at stake here for Afghanistan? Let's hear in the words of the NATO Secretary General Anders Rasmussen.
We have pledged to contribute to financing the Afghan security forces. That assistance is put at risk if we can't deploy our own training mission to Afghanistan. And furthermore, the international community has pledged to provide development assistance to Afghanistan. That aid might also be put at risk. So a lot is at stake, and I'm hopeful that the bilateral security agreement between Afghanistan and the United States will be signed and pave the way for a NATO legal framework so that we can deploy a training mission after 2014.
That was NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen. Here's a question, though. If this agreement is not signed by the end of the year, as Mr. Rasmussen said, as Secretary of State Kerry said, as Ms. Susan Rice said when she went there, is that such a big deal, or is it politics as play, Mr. Campbell?
Well, I don't know that December 31st has been out there now for a while as the optimal date to have this agreed by. Recent reports are stating that it could go into February or March just from the U.S. and coalition planning aspect. But we start creeping along and it becomes very tenuous the deeper we get into it, because the planners who are trying to forecast what our mission is going to be post-2014 right now are inundated with a number of scenarios because there's a lot of uncertainty as to what that will be. And they're going to need time to get to the zero.
But aren't militaries used to planning for 2 separate or 3 separate scenarios at the same time? Why can't the US and NATO plan as if they're going to leave some troops there, as if this agreement will be signed, and chances are that it will be, and then if something else happens, they have plan B? What's the problem with that?
There's 2 aspects to that. One is just the physical logistics of getting everything relocated out of Afghanistan. It is a landlocked country. It doesn't have any ports, or in a scenario where 0 means 0 at the end of 2014, it doesn't have access to any bases or places where you can at least just leave the equipment and gradually move it out of the country. So it is a Herculean effort to get everything out of the country, and that takes a lot of time. And so there's just the physical part of it. And the planning part right now is, it's not just the BSA, but it's also, thus far, there hasn't been a clear plan articulated, even by the White House, for what a post-14 presence would look like. So in having to plan for deployments, which units are going to be coming a year from now to Afghanistan, that all takes a lot of time and effort to plan. And having various scenarios keeps a lot of people, not just out in the theater, but here in the U.S. at a great deal of flexibility.
You want to add to it?
Yeah, just want to add that, and then there's, in addition to the logistics of moving troops and planning that, there's also the authorization. We're talking about more than the United States now. We're talking about a large number of countries that may make a contribution. They've got to very often go to their own parliaments, their own legislatures, and to get approval. And this is done in advance. So there's more than just the logistics, as important as that may be. Let me also mention, though, that I think that the real ace in the hole here, and why I think most of us believe that he will sign it, is that without that, the ability of the Afghans to maintain a national security force,
It's going to need $4 billion a year that the U.S. is going to
the
provide.
net income of Afghanistan isn't much more than $2 billion. So even if they were to pay it all out of their own pocket, they'd only come up with 50% of what they would need to keep a force that would be a meaningful force against the insurgency.
What is the meaning of the comment Secretary of State Kerry made, that somebody else can sign this agreement, the defense minister can sign it?
It's interesting. I think what they're doing right now is trying to find, they're seeing Karzai, the person, the politician, as the one impediment to getting this done. So I think they're trying to explore perhaps some legal options to, in a way, get around the main impediment and get this signed, because as we saw with Aloya Zurga, as we've seen with numerous interviews with other officials, there is widespread support for some level of sustained presence beyond 2015. So I think it's important to remember, though, even if a defense minister does sign this, it then has to go to Parliament for that approval, and President Karzai, as the president, would have to sign it into law to ratify it.
And,
See, it would be his way of looking for a technical way out. But he hasn't bitten on that.
I was actually going to ask you this. Are they giving him a way out, or are they sending him a message?
I think that they thought they might be giving him a way out if he wanted to take it. That is, I've got my qualms about this, but I hear the people. I just can't sign it, but if others, but he apparently has not bought that. Let me add something else, that we wonder what in fact is the date in which he would sign such an agreement. He talked about after the election. Well, what does that mean? There's going to be very likely a runoff, and that'll take place in May. And I would put some money on the fact that that will be contested. In fact, the first round may be contested. Everything could get pushed back. So we're really not talking about April at all, if what he means is until we have a new president, which would be the reason for waiting until after the election. But realistically now, we don't know that. If a new president comes in, is he in a position then conceivably to renegotiate? So I think that we have reason to be skeptical about this date out there, which seems to me to be very indefinite.
Is it possible that President Karzai, and of course we're all speculating here, even his close associates are saying we don't know what's going on in his head. Is it possible that he's not happy with the concessions he made? As you said, he's worried about his legacy, and now he's thinking maybe I can get something more out of them.
Well, I think he's certainly trying to get as much as he can out of the U.S., if not through sustained assistance, then through some other concessions of his own. I think that's why he started talking about Guantanamo and this peace process and things that he knew realistically were not going to be possible in the tighter timelines we're looking at to make a sustained presence possible. I think he just wants to go down fighting, if nothing else. And in the end, I agree with Dr. Weinbaum. He will eventually have to sign it because the only thing worse than that is not signing it and taking the risks of what post-14 Afghanistan will look like.
And what kind of a legacy does he leave? I mean, if we were talking about a legacy, if his legacy is that everything falls apart in the wake of the international departure, that his name will go down as being responsible for the collapse of the Afghan government.
And if there are no troops, there's no civilian aid either. That's what I
think that's the most underreported aspect of this, is that not having any foreign presence there, you are going to have an international community that is already questions some of the concerns with regards to cronyism, corruption, all these things. Be very, at the very least, less willing to provide the kind of money we're talking about that it would take to sustain even just the security forces going forward. Without that funding, they really have a small chance of sustaining.
Now, one thing he says, he wants U.S. to initiate a robust dialogue with the Taliban. I talked to James Dobbins last week and asked where the talks with Taliban are going, and he basically said they collapsed with Doha, but let's hear what he had to say.
I think this was as a result of a genuine misunderstanding. I'm not suggesting it was Taliban bad faith. I think they simply didn't understand the conditions under which the office was supposed to open. But the result was that that they were forced to take down their flag and take down the sign, and told that they could only present themselves as the political office of the Taliban. And they felt disrespected as a result of this, and have refused to continue discussions under those conditions. In particular, they've been unwilling to enter into discussions with the Afghan government or the High Peace Council. We don't think U.S. Taliban discussions would be very useful unless they led to and were accompanied by negotiations among the Afghans, because after all, we can't negotiate peace in Afghanistan, only the Afghans can do that. So we're hopeful that the Taliban will, perhaps earlier, perhaps after the upcoming elections, be willing to talk to the High Peace Council and entering into a meaningful peace process with the government of Afghanistan. And if they're willing to do that, then we're more than happy to also have talks with them.
Okay, so we just heard Jim Dobbins, the special representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan. A couple of things I find interesting. He hasn't said it, but he's indicated that the Taliban may be willing to talk to the U.S. They're just not willing to talk to Karzai and the High Peace Council. Dr. Weinbaum.
What he worries about is that somehow there's going to be a deal struck, in his own
backyard.
Well, his own suspicions. I'll use that word rather than the clinical term. In his own suspicions, he really thinks that others are somehow going to reach a deal and then impose it on himself and on Afghanistan. He's had this in the back of his mind. And what really fed this in a way was the fact that when those Doha conversations began, it seemed to be the United States on one side and the Taliban on the other. Well, the Taliban had specific interests. They wanted to get the release of particular individuals in Guantanamo. And they made it very clear that they didn't want to speak to Hamid Karzai because he represented, for them, the system they were trying to overthrow. Mm-hmm. Somehow he tried to square all of this. But I think, again, the reality here is that there are not going to be any peace talks with this government, and I would venture to say, nor will there be with its successor.
And we will definitely come to this. Do you understand with Dobbins that it was genuine Taliban misunderstanding with the flag when they raised the flag and Karzai said, no, 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 this is not an embassy, you can't raise a flag, you're a political group or a violent group with that?
Well, I think it was indicative of a larger point with the Taliban, and that is that they crave international recognition. They have since they were the leading political entity in Afghanistan back in the 1990s, when only 3 countries around the world recognized them as the rightful rulers of Afghanistan, and they continue to do so today. And I think the reason that they're so willing to engage with the U.S. is that that gives them a certain amount of prestige. When they're one-on-one bilateral negotiations, they're able to keep Karzai, who they see as the puppet, out of the equation and deal one-on-one with the world superpower. So I think that is raising the flag, putting up the sign. I think that's all indicative of that sort of that longing for recognition. And the other thing is it's a lower risk dealing with the Americans when you agree to sit down with Karzai and their government. You're putting on them some level of legitimacy in your eyes that could be pretty risky to your constituency.
Okay, now here's a question. The Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, when he recently went to Afghanistan, said Pakistan is more than willing to help in talks with the Taliban. Dr. Weinbaum, where is that going?
Well, let me say that I think that Pakistan is sincere in a way. It would be in Pakistan's interest to get a political settlement. They want to avoid a civil war. That's not going to serve their purposes. And they're really not comfortable with the idea of the Taliban scoring a victory in Afghanistan because things come apart. The way in which they overcome these problems is to get an agreement which puts the Taliban into the equation in Afghanistan, but in a way immerses them in the politics of Afghanistan and thereby checks their ambitions. And what the Pakistanis are particularly concerned about is that if they become powerful throughout the country or even in the south and the east of the country, they're linking up with Pakistan's own insurgency, which wasn't an issue in the 1990s and now is very much an issue. So that Pakistan sees very much its policy in Afghanistan through the prism of what are going to be the impact on its own very serious insurgency.
Because the head of TTP, Mullah Fazlullah, was until very recently in Afghanistan, and some say he couldn't have been there without the Afghan Taliban support. What is happening with Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, this very high-profile Afghan Taliban leader that was released from Pakistani prison at the request of Mr. Karzai?
You know, it's been difficult to keep close tabs on it. You know, he was let out with a good amount of publicity, and then he sort of kind of disappeared into Pakistan after that. And it's to the reporting I've seen, it's difficult to discern right now the level of influence he would have on any potential talks, or whether this was just sort of a show on the side of the Pakistani government to let him go after the years of being sort of criticized for holding him, without really continuing to keep close tabs on him to ensure that he was not going to himself cut a deal with the Afghans without the Pakistanis having a very good idea of what he was negotiating on. And he also brings up the question of what his authority within the Taliban is now, given that he's been under house arrest for so long, and whether or not he still has the same level of seniority and authority that he once had prior to his arrest.
Dr. Weinbaum, do you think, I mean, why was there so much emphasis on releasing this guy? Do you think he still has that kind of legitimacy and authority within the Taliban ranks?
Well, we don't know, but it would seem not for this reason. He's been under the care of the Pakistanis so long and close, therefore, to the ISI. And the Quetta Shura people, Mullah Omar's crowd, obviously, for however much they need one another, they don't trust one another. There's a great deal of suspicion about their motives on both sides. So that's one reason. But initially, it seems that he broke with the Quetta Shura by trying to initiate peace talks. He was apparently not doing it at the behest of Mullah Omar. So I think the facts seem to indicate that to put all of the stock really here on his delivering some kind of opening, I think it was misplaced initially.
Okay, now you said that you don't think they're going to be talks. So I asked James Dobbins, what happens if the US leaves, NATO leaves, as they're planning to do, and there are no talks? Will there be a civil war? Let's hear what he had to say.
We expect that the current conflict will continue for a while at least. And that's why it's important that the United States continue to provide training, advice, and assistance to the Afghan armed forces so that they continue to defend Afghanistan and protect the Afghan population.
Well, he didn't use the word civil war, Mr. Campbell, but he did say the current violence will continue with less NATO forces, less new US forces there. The Afghan forces not 100% ready. Are we looking at a possible civil war scenario?
You know, it's difficult to say at this point for sure. You're looking at a lot of uncertainty. You're looking at increased instability, particularly, again, if the international funding for the Afghan National Security Forces is not provided anymore. It's difficult to see now the degree to which the Afghan National Security Forces would hold up. Certainly, you're at a much higher risk of them breaking up and kind of, again, defaulting back to a 1990s type of scenario where you've got a lot of tribal and ethnic politics playing into the instability, which is just another complicating factor in what would be a very tough environment.
Dr. Weinbaum, by not signing the agreement now, is President Karzai not exacerbating the situation by sending a message to Taliban? There's a possibility there'll be no troops here. Why should Taliban talk when they're looking at a possibility of no NATO troops?
Of course. I think that speaks for itself. But somehow he has the illusion here that we're not going to leave him hanging. We're not going to leave him out on a limb. We're not going to desert Afghanistan. So I agree with you. I don't see any way in which the Taliban at this point in time wouldn't say, look, the election may go badly, and that may start to break things up. There is no support, conceivably, if there's a zero option. There's no support for the army. If you can't pay the army salaries, as has been stated here, you can expect, therefore, what's going to happen is they'll take their weapons and they'll go back and they'll join the militias that many of them were associated with or will be invited to join. And then we have, I think, the ingredients of a civil war, but a much more messy civil war than we saw even in the 90s. It won't be the Taliban against the Northern Alliance. It'll be more of a free-for-all. Where various groups may very well be fighting for turf, and indeed, the Taliban may fight among themselves.
Are there groups there that are as powerful that they may take on the Taliban if you're saying the civil war is going to be messier than before?
It's difficult to say because, as Dr. Weinbaum just said, we don't know exactly how close-knit all facets of the Taliban themselves are. So in trying to sort of play entity against entity, I can certainly envision a scenario where you've got, among even the Taliban, a lot of discord and infighting and trying to get, governing or control over cities like Kandahar, parts of Helmand.
Bigger areas. Well, thank you so much. It's so interesting, but unfortunately our time is up. Our guests today were Jason Campbell of the RAND Corporation, who's worked on Afghanistan extensively, and Dr. Marwan Weinbaum of the Middle East Institute, who's an expert on Pakistan and Afghanistan. Thank you for watching. We look forward to your questions and comments on Facebook, social media, Twitter, and also check us out again next week for another episode of Access Point.